Pete Walther.
So is this the beginning?
This is the beginning.
Okay.
This is how we start. Yeah.
I never know exactly when it starts, you know?
Right? You never know how it's going to start. Yeah.
Right.
I'm going to read your bio real quick. And then, it's pretty light, even though you have a heavy career. So I think we're going to need to kind of have you explain kind of what you've done, and then we'll kind of dig in. So I'm going to read this, and then we'll move on. Pete Walther is a U.S. Army Special Forces veteran, an OGA government contractor with 25 plus years of experience leading teams through complex national level missions. During Peter's time with 5th Special Forces Group, he took part in Operation Enduring Freedom as a member of one of the first teams into Afghanistan. The mission was portrayed in the movie Horse Soldiers. ODA 595 was part of the initial operation to Iraq. As a government contractor, Pete wore many hats as a combat advisor, personal protection team leader, and trainer in numerous countries.
Yes, super light.
It brings up a very good question, though. So the movie 12 Strong, that's did they get Chris Hemsworth to play you on purpose?
Actually, Chris Hemsworth plays our team leader.
Okay.
Which, and Mark is the team leader. Mark is super happy about that. They do not look alike. Yeah. If there's no likeness whatsoever. Yeah.
Total.
But he was super happy about it.
Yeah.
I ended up being a mix of a couple guys.
Okay.
But
a little Hollywood in there.
Yeah.
Yep. So that was
our team. That was our mission.
That's awesome.
That was it was probably one of the most exciting missions that I've been on to date, which is good and bad, because when you go on a mission like that, everything else, you kind of compare it back to that, and it maybe wasn't as exciting after that. So that was challenging.
It's funny when you Google the movie and the cast, there's one that just says, Pete, a guy from South Dakota with rodeo experience.
Yes.
Are you from South Dakota?
I am.
And you have rodeo experience?
Yes.
I like it. All right.
From South Dakota, rodeo experience, not very good at it, but did do
They
it.
didn't ask that. That's not part of it. They didn't know that. Yeah. Well, dude, so that's awesome. I've known you for a long time, and I don't know a lot about your history. I know you were a Green Beret. I know you did some cool stuff with the 3-letter agencies. So this is going to be the first time that I've heard this. So why don't you talk about that op if you can? What you can talk about?
For sure. Like, so we, pre 9/11, it was the Clinton era. So it was mostly just going on training exercises and JSETs, Joint Combined Exercise Training host nation entities. But so the team was off doing training when that happened. I was actually in South Bend, Indiana. There used to be an AM General Humvee driving course we'd go to, because 5th Group worked predominantly in the Middle East. So we drove a version of a Humvee that was set up for the desert. So we were up there driving those, and then I was up there with one of the warrant officers from the group, and we were always messing around, and we treated each other like adults, first name, but he calls up and says, "Hey, I need you guys to come back." We're way on the other end of the track, and I was like, "Dave, I'm not coming back. I'm having a great time out here." And at the time, I was a staff sergeant. He goes, "Staff Sergeant, I need you back here right now." I'm like, "Oh, this must be serious." So we get back, and AM General had this setup. It was a classroom. We walked in, and we look at the TV, and you see, the first tower had fallen. And we're all looking around, and we're like, what is going on right now? What am I seeing? And Dave comes over and goes, "That's happening right now." He goes, "We're going to pack up our stuff, and we're going back to the hotel. We're leaving." He goes, "We're going to figure out what's next." So we sat there for about a day because nobody knew what to do. So we were going to fly home. Nobody could fly. So we were in South Bend. Next day, we were walking around South Bend, and there was a flag in every yard on every house. And, after seeing what happened with the towers, we were all just stunned. We were like, are we going somewhere? But, as you call back to home base, like, are we going somewhere? They're like, well, we don't know. We're not sure what's happening right now. Nobody knew anything. So it took us probably a week to get back.
So not even you guys could fly.
No, because there was nothing flying. So, I mean, we drove back. And then getting onto a military installation at that time was...
It was impossible.
It was impossible.
It was insane.
I rode my bike. I was in Clarksville, Tennessee. The house I owned was probably 6 or 7 miles from it, and that was the easiest way to get on post. So ride your bike in, and got back to the unit, and I was sitting around. I'm like, what are we doing? I was like, nobody knows. Nobody knows yet. And then finally, I came down and said, you guys need to pack a pallet. I'm like, what should we pack? Like, what's the mission? They're like, bring it all. So we packed pretty much everything. I think we had 3 or 4 pallets and an ISU 90, like a small Connex. So we got it all packed, and then we're like, well, when are we leaving? We'll let you know. So
hurry up and wait.
Yep. So we sat around, we hurried up and wait, and we sat there. I want to think for another week and a half or so. And then we ended up flying all the way to Uzbekistan. And we were sitting there, and we were given briefings. And
Just a stage.
Just a stage.
Just a stage.
Yep.
So you were close.
Yep. We were in Uzbekistan. By this point we knew, like, okay, the mission's going to be in Afghanistan. So this was the staging area. It was really austere. It was, when we first got there, there was no tents. There was a piece of ground. And they were like, that's yours. So, and then over the course of a week or so, the tents went up. And then we ended up we started developing a brief for the mission.
Now, real quick, you got in country. Was that, oftentimes when there's war, you get in country and the American forces have built a base. There's wire around. I mean, was this even established as an American piece of land yet? Or were you guys just camping in the middle of
We were just camping on an old Russian air base. At that time, there was an outer security. I think it was 10th Mountain. And they showed up, and they had very little cold weather gear. And they were out on positions. And we kind of walked out and checked on them, like, how you guys doing out here? And they're like, well, all of our gear got lost. So it's a little chilly. But no, it was not set up. There was really nothing there.
So was this October?
This was late September.
Late September.
Yeah.
Man, that's real quick.
Yeah.
You guys are out there.
So, we had all of our stuff. But again, we were still working out, like, what exactly is the mission? Right. And at this point, you had a lot of senior officials, government agencies. They're trying to say, okay, exactly who are we going after? What is the mission? So we were trying to build out a brief and some sort of a con-op for something we weren't exactly sure what it was going to look like. So it was a lot of guessing. But the team had worked together for quite a while. And there was me and another gentleman, Chad. We were the youngest guys on the team. The rest of the team had been together for a long time. Some of them had worked together since Desert Storm. So they worked together really good, had great synergy. So we put together sort of the broadest plan we could put together, and we briefed. It was competitive, so we had to brief the group commander, and he liked what we were putting down because.
So when you say competitive, you had other teams out there fighting for that mission.
100%.
Okay.
Yep. And I think this is my opinion. I think one of the things that sold our team and our capability was the simple fact that we were willing to say there are some things that we can't forecast. We don't know how it's going to work out, but we'll work through it. And we have a PACE plan, a primary, alternate, contingency, and emergency. And I think the fact that we were flexible enough, I think, is the reason why we got the mission.
So part of that mission involved horses?
Not at first. Nobody knew that because we were going to infill with the 160th. So we were waiting on weather because not the weather where we were at in Uzbekistan, but the weather in Afghanistan because you were going over the mountains. So we kept getting weathered out for that. So we ended up waiting on that. But again, still no talk about horses. We knew they had horses, but we also knew they had vehicles and everything else because there were, Taliban had tanks, they had pickups and, all kinds of different vehicles. So we thought maybe those would be available. We didn't bring any vehicles. So when we rode in on a CH-47, it was just rucksacks. It was we didn't bring a lot with us. We didn't know about the horses until the next morning after we landed. I think we infilled probably 2 or 3 in the morning, but we were all at this little walled, it was just a mud wall area with a small building, and everybody's up pulling security. And then there's this gigantic dust cloud coming at us, and we're all looking at it like, not really sure what it is. We put some glass on it, and it looked to me like thousands of horses. I don't know the exact number, but there was a lot. And we were, everybody was standing up, ready to go, because not exactly sure what this is going to be. And then the guy that we were going to work with, his name was General Rashid Dostum. And they pull up on horses, and they dismount, and through some of the intelligence community contacts, they're like, this is Dostum. This is the guy that we're going to work with. I think he's part of the Northern Alliance. Okay. And he went right to work. He laid out a map made of silk, and he started outlining where enemy positions were located. This went on for probably 3 or 4 hours. While that was happening, we were task organizing to break the team down because we weren't exactly sure how it was going to unfold. So we were used to working in small teams. So, 3 to 4 man elements. But as this concluded, Dostum said, "Okay, we're going to leave on those horses. We're going to the front." And we all kind of looked around like, okay.
Now, is this where you shined as a new guy?
Yeah. Enter Pete.
Well,
I've ridden a horse.
Having ridden a horse was super valuable, but there's also these aren't like American horses. These are really small, like mountain horses, and the saddles are made out of wood. So it's a little different scenario than you might expect. But also we brought in a lot of gear, thinking that we might be walking somewhere or throwing these rucksacks in the back of a truck. That wasn't the case. So you're pulling all your stuff out and throwing it into a small assault pack or backpack, because the horses they couldn't carry it. And then for the stuff that we didn't want to leave behind, we ended up putting it on donkeys. And of course we're like, well, hey, what happens to the gear that's on the donkeys, because they can't keep up? And they're like, no, it'll just meet you there. Okay, and it did, and it did. It always met you at some point. But so we rode the first day, and we got to a position, and Dostum pointed out where the enemy was at. We couldn't necessarily see him at first, and this was one of those things where, especially in SF, we spent a lot of time thinking about working with indigenous personnel, host nation, but we also have trained for it. I mean, that is what the Q course is about. And so he's pointing at an enemy position, and to drop a bomb on a position that you can't really identify, you're like, that's not great. That's not what we really want to do. But it was also, hey, we need to have a show of force here and show our new partner that we are here to fight. So we ended up dropping some bombs over in what we consider the enemy held area, and right away everybody was like, yes, great. Our medic, Bill, spoke a little bit of Arabic, and I thought one of the things was interesting is you could hear the radio chatter. So they had handheld radios, and all across the mountaintops they had antennas hooked to repeaters with batteries that they would recharge with solar chargers. And Bill says, "What are they saying?" He goes, "Oh, we're talking back and forth to the Taliban." It's like, really? He goes, "Oh yeah, we talk to them all the time." Yeah, what are they saying? They said, "Oh, well, the Americans are here. We're going to win the war," something to that effect. And it was just odd. So I'm thinking, so you guys are just talking to each other, normal? Like, yeah. And they also knew that we infilled, because all of their sentries were on mountaintops. So as we flew in, they were like, "Oh yeah, the helicopters are inbound." So I mean, for a country with very low technology, they had pretty good situational awareness about what was going on.
So tell us about the posture of the Taliban at that time and how they worked with us as allies and what they meant in the region.
So, you had Taliban and then Al-Qaeda, but then you had Northern Alliance is who we worked with. And the Northern Alliance, they were robust people. These were people that had been driven into the mountains by the Taliban and had essentially been hiding out there. And some of them had been there for 10 years, but the Northern Alliance, they wanted their country back. And a lot of them had a very deep-seated hatred for the Taliban. There was a guy that, one of the things Dostum did is he assigned like a protective detail to the, as we split up into smaller teams, he assigned like a protective detail to the teams with clear instructions, like nothing is to happen to these Americans. Because in his mind, if one of the Americans got killed, then the U.S. may not want to continue the mission. So one of the guys we had was the Marble Man. I don't know if he slept. I know he smoked a lot, and we gave him as many packs of cigarettes as he wanted. But he had been held in a Taliban camp, and he had been beaten with like 1-inch gauge wire. So you can imagine the level of hate that he had for the Taliban. It ran really deep. So the Northern Alliance had no love lost for the Taliban whatsoever.
But then they're talking to him, so like
They are.
Al-Qaeda, common enemy.
Yep. Well, and there's still Taliban. There was still a common enemy there, but Al-Qaeda was definitely the bigger enemy to them, because some of the Taliban, it was kind of you know how some of the Taliban were. It was kind of like Iraq in terms of with the Ba'ath Party. You know, some of the Taliban were there because you had to be there to get along, to just live. You know, some of them joined it to stay alive. But then some of them they enjoyed being Taliban and all the things that came with that. So there was different levels, you know. But yeah, for the hardcore fighters for the Taliban, there was a lot of hate there. But I think as you know, and as we broke up into teams, it was actually because of the way the terrain was laid out. We had there was a valley that kind of separated. We were on the west side, and a lot of the Taliban positions were on the east side. So we had this natural terrain feature that really kept us separated from them. So at this point, it was an air war. But the biggest thing that we brought to it was being able to communicate with the aircraft. You know, the Navy pilots were amazing.
So at this point, what I'm confused about is that are you working with or against the Taliban?
Against the Taliban.
Against, okay.
100% against.
Okay.
Yep. So we have the Northern Alliance who we're on the same side.
That's your ally
Yep.
in the region, right?
And so, and the numbers fluctuated with how many Northern Alliance we had. At points, I think we had somewhere between 5,000 and 15,000 Northern Alliance troops, and some of them were walking, some of them were on horseback, and eventually they had found vehicles. But they were essentially our ground element. So as we would get into the ground effort, where they would assault a position, this was primarily the Northern Alliance, and it was horse charges. You know, now I know in the movie you see Americans doing the horse charge. That it's a little bit of Hollywood. Nobody was shooting their M4 off of a horse.
But it looks cool.
It does look cool.
Makes money.
It does look cool. Yeah. But
Did you ever get any royalties for that movie?
I did not.
Of course you didn't.
No.
Of course not. Why
No.
would you?
No royalties. I did get a really nice statue.
Oh, good.
It's the same one that's in New York. It's a beautiful statue. It sits at the house. It's tremendous, but that's about it. Yeah. But so we're pretty much in an air war, and we had it was an amazing amount of air power, and to see that, because even at that stage of my career, you know, like America has just an amazing military, right? But to see that in all of its might directed into one common enemy, just amazing. And not only with the air power, but when you would send up a request, because we requested new saddles, like that was going to fix things for us, even though these were little tiny horses. There was a guy back in the States who went and found saddles. Those saddles got put over on an aircraft, and then saddles got put onto a 47 and delivered to Afghanistan. Granted, they were a little late because by then we had transitioned to vehicles, but it was the resourcefulness, and then it was just the awe-inspiring might of the U.S. military.
Yeah, I mean, I was in Iraq in the beginning, and we'll talk about that with you later, but we had a lot of flexibility, and we worked fast, and we had a lot of ability to just get stuff done. It's not until the bureaucracy comes into a region and the politicians get their fingers deep in there that things just bog down.
Yeah, garrison breaks out. And it's unfortunate because, the guys on the ground, we've invested so much money and so many resources into making these guys, not only they're strategists, you know, they if that's is that a good word, strategist? I think it's probably decent.
Yeah.
But these guys, they know what they're doing. They've been to school for this. You know, they are, you know, I think just like SEALs, Green Berets, I mean, these guys are at the peak of their careers. I would consider them like PhD level, you know. They know what they're doing. And so if we let them do their job, it will work out the way we want. And with all of the resources they have behind them, it's unlikely that we would lose any event like that. But
So how long were you in Afghanistan that first time?
we were only there for about 4 months. Yeah, it was quick.
Yeah.
Yeah, because as we started going up the, I think it was Kashende Bala is the valley I was referencing. As that started to move, it was broken down to where we had one part of the team was essentially like a logistics cell. So they were providing medical, because as the Northern Alliance were getting hurt, you know, they would come back, get medical treatment. We were dropping bundles of aid for the Afghanis while they were moving. So instead of dropping bundles and then having to move it forward, we were dropping it where they were going to be, so that they could move faster. So this train was moving really, really fast. It was basically logistics. You had the current fight and then the future fight. And the future fight was focused on QRF. So whoever was coming to support the current fight, then they were right there and they were calling in air. And then we were focused on the current fight, getting all the aircraft and directing the ground forces. And then the logistics cell, keeping everybody moving and pushing everything forward. So when all of that was happening, it was moving along really quickly. So it didn't take us long to get to a place which was a critical point on the map, which was the Tangi Pass. And that was south of Mazar Sharif. And so by the time we had made it there, that was basically, we were, I think, within a day's travel of Mazar. And one of the things that Colonel Mulholland told us before we left, he's like, if you guys don't get out of the mountains before the first snowfall, you're probably going to spend the winter in the mountains.
It's reassuring.
Yeah.
Yes.
And spending the winter up there, that would have been a tough winter.
With minimal amount of gear, right?
Right. So that would have been a long winter. So there was definitely some motivation, but I also have to hand it to the Northern Alliance. You know, they were up to the task. They wanted to win, you know, so they were moving fast as well. But
what was your mission? Like what was the mission?
We wanted to take Mazar Sharif. Yeah. And that was because that was a stronghold, and that was considered to be a key terrain and for the northern provinces. And Dostum was our guy to get that done. I know he came under he wasn't favored very much later on, but for that part of the effort, it was amazing.
Tell us about him a little bit.
He's an Uzbek. He received training from the Russians. So when we go back, we talk about that silk map. That's kind of where some of his training came from. Very gregarious guy. We went in with the idea that he was on kidney dialysis. So we were going to bring in a dialysis machine from Germany. No such issues. Man was healthy as can be. I think he was in his mid 60s. Very healthy guy, great plan, very, very intelligent. And from what I experienced in his interaction with the Afghanis, because he had been in control of, he was a warlord, but he had been in control of the northern provinces. And everybody seemed to love him. And he seemed to do great things for the people of those provinces. So I'm sure if you weren't on his most favored list, maybe that was the perspective. But for us at that time, and for what apparently he had done for those people, they loved him.
The northern provinces. So break down a little bit how Afghanistan itself works, and because it's a deeply third world country with scattered government. So we're used to the United States having a very organized system. They don't. Can you break down a little bit how that works?
Well, I mean, Afghanistan is primarily tribal. So the provinces are very loose lines. You have some key cities throughout the country, but it is primarily tribal. So they lead, now they will lead across tribal lines, being that Dostum was an Uzbek. He had some influence over some of the other tribes, but again, like it's kind of like these imaginary lines that the powers to be have drawn over the years. Those lines don't really exist. It's really where the tribe is and what they control, But Mazar was a key piece. And part of the reason Mazar was also a key piece is because there was an airfield that we believed was serviceable. So it would serve as an airhead. So we could start bringing in more troops, more resources. And there was also a land bridge. There was a bridge that led from Uzbekistan into Afghanistan, which was also because, like we always talk about, logistics is a key part of any campaign. And so that was some of the key things.
Yeah. Logistics wins wars.
Oh, yeah.
Or loses them.
Oh, yeah. 100%. So that was one of the reasons why Mazar was so important.
Now, was he like a CIA asset, or how did you guys find him?
Well, so the company they had some interaction with him. And I believe that interaction had gone back several years. And to the point where they knew how to get a hold of him, and they orchestrated it to where there was a sat phone in his hand, and there was phone calls. Agreements were made. There was definitely some cash exchanged, and he agreed to work with us. And
do you think the U.S. had this relationship with him for a long time, or do you think it was hasty?
I'm not exactly sure, but I think if we had the relationship with him, it may have been sort of on the back burner.
Right.
Yeah.
Probably, and I could imagine, like, if you're somebody who's anticipating war or that's your job, you're going to want to find the people who are willing to fight for you in regions that are hostile, and probably already have that guy like on your Rolodex.
Yeah.
So
I was never clear exactly how we knew that he was, because he was living in the mountains, and I mean this wasn't like a city; these were mud huts. So how they knew exactly where he was at and exactly how to get a hold of him. I don't know if that was a word of mouth kind of thing or what, but
So did he command the loyalty of the people in the northern provinces? And was it like a situation where we would maybe loosely associate that as like a mayor or a governor, or was it just totally a different situation?
I think governor is probably the closest approximation. I mean, he definitely seemed to have that kind of command, but he was viewed as the governor, and then we can even call him the commander in chief for that area. So he, provided everything for them. I mean, even to the point where he had a hand in redoing the Blue Mosque up there, which was it was a very impressive mosque. But so he worked in governance, but also the military affairs.
How do you, I mean, it's almost impossible to think about how you actually command people before the internet. And of course, they're third world. They don't have that for sure. And that's a lot of territory. Afghanistan is not small. It's interesting to think about how you could command that much territory and people with just as one man. I mean, did he have people around him?
Oh, yeah, he had sub-commanders.
Oh, did he? Okay.
It was a very well organized. I mean, if you were to look at it, it would resemble some sort of order of battle like we would have in the U.S. You had a commander, you had sub-commanders. Now, whether those are generals, colonels, but yeah, they had that. So they had. It was, like I said, it was very well organized, and sometimes they were able to use the radios to communicate. But because it wasn't a secure net, they used runners. So, I mean, jump on your horse and go get a message to, Commander so-and-so.
Yeah, because you were saying before that the Taliban knew that you guys, so like this is the one open radio channel. So if they're trying to get across sensitive information, the Taliban's picking that right up.
For sure. And I think they were ICOMs, so I mean, this was nothing secure,
Yeah.
Nothing at all.
So 4 months on your first trip. Anything else about that we've missed that's like significant point, something to kind of point out that might be worth talking about? Or just a lot of bombing?
Well, there was a lot of bombing, but there was also just a lot of weird scenarios. We had We had the Kuala Jangi event. That was where Mike Spann was killed.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
He was the first, was it
He was
the first American?
I believe he was the first American.
Killed in Afghanistan. In that war,
And that was one of those where there was supposed to be a mass surrender in Kunduz. And Kunduz, if you are looking at Mazar Sharif, was to the east. So by direction, at this point, there was more leadership on the ground. And by their direction, the team went to Kunduz. And the surrender happened. And so what was happening is we realized it really early on that the Taliban that were surrendering, because remember how I talked about those different levels of Taliban? So the hardline guys, they would get searched and they were handled differently. But then other Taliban who were just kind of along for the ride, they would just tell them, hey, just jump in the back of the truck and we're going to take you over to this prison. And in some cases they knew each other or they were related loosely, but none of these people were being searched. And this is something we were communicating back. So I don't know if you're familiar with the trucks they have. They're the big open bed trucks, and they would just have people standing in the back of these trucks, probably 50, 60 people. And they haven't been searched. That would be a normal thing that American forces would do. Before you take somebody off of a target or objective, you'd search them, and then they would go on to the next point, and they'd probably get searched again. But that didn't happen. So there was hundreds of prisoners in Kuala Jangi. And so most of your combat power was in Kunduz and focused on Kunduz when that went down. And so Kuala Jangi was set up to where it was an old fortress, really thick mud walls, but it had a basement, which is where they were keeping some of the more extreme Taliban. And these were the guys that some of the intelligence community was really looking to get some answers out of. Like, I'm sure they were, where's Bin Laden? Had some questions for him, and that's where a lot of the questioning was taking place, and that's where Mike Spann was killed because of that uprising. And it started off where you had guys with grenades, you had guys with pistols, and they just weren't searched. They weren't searched. So
yeah, that's the bad part about being in there early on. You just don't have the SOPs in place, and you're dealing with people that you've never worked with before from halfway across the world that don't even speak your language. Yeah, there's a lot that can go wrong.
Oh yeah. I mean, so that was a terrible situation. Yeah. But that was a really big event. I think one of the other big events is when we opened up the airhead, because now you've got C-17s landing, and you're occupying with some real force. So that was one of the key objectives, getting that and the Tarmez, I think it's Tarmez Bridge, getting that opened up and seeing vehicles come across. That was huge. But yeah, I mean, that whole thing was fast, was very efficient, and for most of it there wasn't anybody above the grade of captain. There was later on.
That's awesome.
We had ODA leadership, which is captain and a master sergeant. About 3 to 4 weeks into it, we had what's called a C team. So that was a lieutenant colonel, sergeant major, and some of the folks that come with them. But the relationship had already been really well established with the ODA and the Northern Alliance that they weren't as effective. So that relationship was already built. So primarily, the majority of our 4 months, that it was executed by captain and below, E8 and below, and that's where I go back to.
That's a little bit of a lesson that we should all take from that.
Right.
I mean, you get a lot of bureaucracy involved and a lot of people with a lot of opinions who are not operating. And I know I saw that firsthand too, and it bothers me. It's one of the things that bothers me more than anything about going to war is the people above who they just don't know how things operate on the ground, and they really make things difficult. They make things actually more dangerous for I know they're trying.
Sure.
They're trying to do the right thing. They're trying to do the right thing for the American people, for the soldiers, for everybody. I mean, some of them try. Some of them aren't.
Yeah.
Some of them are in it for themselves. But for the most part, we can just assume that they're trying. But, they make, in one case, in my situation, we were having a lot of people in Iraq getting killed. And there was this organization that popped up in the States. I think it was a Marine. I can't remember his name. He died, and his mom put this big organization up, and this got a lot of attention. And next thing you knew, body armor was flying all over the place. All this body armor, all the Marines had to wear it, all the Army guys had to wear it. They try to make us wear it. Extra body armor. And you need to be nimble. You need to jump over walls. You need to run. You can't do that with all this stuff. The guys had crotch plates and shoulder guards, and it was like, it's insane. I know you're trying to help, but you're just making things more difficult for us.
Yeah, and it's they just don't understand the situation on the ground. And it's hard to get that. You either have to trust the people on the ground or go there and see it for yourself. And a lot of times that doesn't happen, but I will say though, like Colonel Mulholland and the leadership at 5th Group, and even above, because we were communicating. In some cases, we were getting direct messages from Secretary of Defense at the time, Rumsfeld. About the pace of operations initially, but they left a lot of decisions to the guys on the ground. When we were in Sheboygan, which is where Dostum had a place, that is where we came across John Walker Lind. And he did not want anybody to know he was American. I think until he realized that he was going to die in that prison.
Tell us about him.
So he looked very much, he was obviously lighter skinned, but he was part of that crew that was pulled out of Kuala Jangi. And Sheboygan was another area. Whether or not it was a prison before, I don't know. I just know it was a walled in part of a compound. And that's where they had a bunch of these prisoners. And our medic went down. And, at this point, these guys have been disarmed. There's no reason for us to... It's not a direct hostile threat. It's not a threat to us. So we were going in and treating some of them. Bill, our medic, he brought me with because he knows I don't like that. So we were down and we were treating a guy. I think he must have got shot in his hand because it was you could see a groove that went through, looked like a bullet. Gangrene, really, really horrendous. Anyway, so me and Bill are treating him, and Bill's like, clean that out. And I was like, I don't want to. I just don't. But anyway, we did it. And we saw that guy, and Bill had noticed him. He's like, I don't know where he's from. And Bill spoke Arabic, and he'd asked him a couple questions, and the guy either wouldn't answer his questions or he would speak in, Arabic. And so didn't think much more of it. He's like, obviously he doesn't want to go anywhere. But we also had some reporters on the ground. So are you guys familiar with Robert Pelton?
No.
So he had a book that was called The World's Most Dangerous Places. And he had gotten into country somehow pretty early. So he brought with him, and I cannot remember her name, but she was part of his crew. So she was a blonde lady. And we were driving in town. We were basically in like a traffic jam, if you can imagine it. And this blonde lady runs past me and Chad. And I was sitting there, and I look at Chad, and I'm like, was that a blonde woman that just ran past us? And he's like, yeah, I think so. And then she turns around and she comes running back at us. She goes, hey, are you guys Americans? I'm like, yeah. I'm like, what are you doing? Who are you? She's like, I'm here with Robert Pelton. And me and Chad didn't know who that was. I'm like, well, okay. She goes, where's the war? I'm like,
It's that way.
it's
Second block to your right.
yeah, it's kind of everywhere right now. So then we ended up,
we're here. What do you think that means?
so, but it was so bizarre to see her run past. I'm like, I look around like, did I actually just see that? Because you don't see women there without burqas, so it wasn't a thing. But so then we ended up meeting Robert Pelton, and it turns out Bill knew of him. So Robert Pelton went down, and he got video of this guy, and Bob Pelton came in and goes, that guy's an American. And he eventually, John Walker Lind eventually said, I am an American. And now you're kind of in a situation like, well, wait a minute. He is an American. Are we rescuing this guy, or does he stay? Like, what happens now? And that was the source of a lot of conversation between the team on the ground and then back to headquarters. Because like, what's the protocol for this situation? Like, this guy is saying he's American. What does he want us to do? And so we ended up pulling him out of Sheboygan, and not everybody agreed with it. Like, I would say most of us were like, well, he's kind of made his own situation. And I think he's actually out of jail now. But so we ended up picking him up out of there. And then another team came in, picked him up, and took him to wherever he went after that.
So he was a POW, basically.
Well, no,
At the time, or he was just in.
no, he was an enemy combatant. So he was an American kid, I think, from San Francisco, who got tied in to the Taliban training camps and ended up fighting in Afghanistan.
And Americans captured him.
Yes.
Wow.
And so we had this American, and we were like, what do we do with him?
But was he like of Arab descent?
No,
Just a white kid.
Just got radicalized and
yeah, just some kid. You know, I mean, he wasn't.
So what happened to him after he left?
He went. They found him guilty. I think he did 20 some years in prison, and then he was released. And I didn't keep track of him after that, but
I never heard of that story. That's crazy.
yeah, John Walker Lind. It was spicy because, like I said, nobody was exactly sure. Like, well, he's not. We don't think he's a POW. We think he's an enemy combatant. So, what does that mean?
Yeah.
You know, we hadn't been in that situation, so we didn't know either.
Yeah.
But
Wow. Yeah, crazy times, man.
Mm-hmm.
And there were some beheadings early on, and there was some crazy stuff going on. What's that first guy's name?
I'm not talking about Pearl, are we?
I think
Is it Pearl?
I think that's the one that I'm
might
thinking
be.
of.
That might be. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think wasn't he beheaded in Pakistan?
I can't remember, but I just remember there was like video.
Mm-hmm.
There was video.
Well, remember there was that website, ogrish.com.
Yeah,
it was. They had this website, and they would show live beheadings,
Yes,
and they would
that's
burn people alive on there.
yeah, that was. I mean, we were young, and all of a sudden we were now at war, and we're seeing this. That was scary.
Oh yeah.
That was scary shit.
Oh yeah. 'Cause you're thinking, you're like, well, because I think I know when, stories like from some of my relatives about Vietnam. There was some torture that happened there, but you hear stories about World War II from like Grandpa. You got captured, you spent some time in a prison camp, but you never internalized like, hey, I might get my head cut off, like, but that's real now.
They're doing it with like a dull knife on TV.
Oh yeah, it was.
God, that was crazy.
It was a huge wake up call.
Yes.
To understanding what we were really up against.
Right.
And
Wow.
yeah, it was bizarre. But I got to tell you one story though. So when we're in Mazar Sharif, so we're done with horses at this point. We kept one horse. I think we named him Cleve. He was our horse just to kind of ride around the town. But we ended up getting these old Land Cruisers, Toyota Land Cruisers, and we went out, got some new tires on them, and because we were going to take those out, do a couple patrols, and so we're out in the middle of nowhere, and we had a white one and a blue one, and one of the tires came off of, I think, the middle truck, and the tire rolls past me, and I'm like, oh, that's
Just
not good.
literally came off the
It just
rim.
came off. It just sheared the studs. So we stop, and you're in the middle of nowhere, and we're looking around. We're like, damn, can't fix this. That sheared all the studs. And then this, I think it was called a Gaz truck, is the name of it, G-A-Z. This truck shows up, and it's got the boom out front as like a tow truck almost, where I can lift it up. He kind of just shows up out of nowhere, and he looks at it, and he goes, and through our translator, he's like, I can fix this. He goes, I just need to get some studs. And I was looking around, I'm like, from where? Where are you going to get these from? And he sends some guy off. He comes back hours later with studs. They pound them in, put the tire back on. And I'm like, so it's good. He's like, yeah. I'm like, how much do we owe you? He goes, how about a case of MREs? Sure.
sold.
Done.
Yeah, no problem.
Great deal.
Yeah.
But I to this day, I'm like, where did he go?
Where did he even come from?
I don't know.
Just showed up.
Just shows up. He's just out driving around. I don't know. He's like our
Were
version.
you guys like near a city?
No, we weren't close to anything. We were in the middle of nowhere.
This guy's looking for his one job.
I guess.
He's like, Allah told me I need to be here to get some to eat tonight.
Yeah, he clearly doesn't understand how Americans work, because he probably would offer him thousands of dollars.
Yeah,
Yeah,
right, yeah.
I would have given that to him. I'd been like, yeah, here's $1,000.
Here's a briefcase of cash here.
Yeah, oh, yeah. He fixed
we'll
it.
get
And
more.
we went on our way. But it was weird things like that. You're like, oh, it just shows up out of nowhere, fixes it, and it was amazing.
Wow.
But that was one of those weird scenarios.
So is the going back to the beheadings real quick? Is that just as a culture? Is that what they do, or is it just their hatred for Americans and they knew that was? Is that kind of like how they operate with, if they capture other if like Taliban captured Northern Alliance? Is that kind of how they do it, or was that more of an American thing to prove a point?
Well, no, because they do it to other people, and not just Americans. And I don't know if that's a thing that's if it's in any sort of doctrine or if it's written down anywhere. But it is definitely, it's fairly common.
That's their thing.
You see that, and I mean, hell, anything from cutting off heads to stoning, to acid. I mean, it's a rough part of the world.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was an interesting time. And then, and then it was just over. Then we got on to 47 and we flew back to Uzbekistan. And of course, we didn't go in with any documents. So when we showed up and we landed and we're trying to walk from the airfield to where we think we live at this point, they're like, "Hey, you guys got some ID?"
I got the 7.4 right here. Does that count?
Have a lot with me. But this is the point when garrison had broken out, because when we left, there was 3 or 4 tents. And we get back and there's rows and rows and rows of tents. And there's places to wash your clothes. There's a gym now. It's got everything you might want. And then trying to out-process that place to get on the next bird was
because you said 47. That's a helicopter. You're not flying a fixed wing in there. There's no place to land.
Well, there was a runway there because the Russians used to use it.
So why? I mean, was it? How close was it?
So
the flight from where you worked back to Uzbekistan.
Oh, still 3 or 4 hours.
Yeah, man. It's insane to ride in a helicopter that long. It's quite a long time.
Oh yeah.
So they didn't want to fly fixed wing in there?
It's just
730?
It was what was available.
It was what was available. Yeah. Not a whole lot of assets over there at the time.
No, it was still in the build-up phase. Because this is still, this is, and I heard this from Rumsfeld. One of the things is the intention in 01, 02 was never to build it up and occupy. It was to go in, conduct the mission, and then leave. Because in a rare occasion, the Soviets, they published 2 books. I can't remember the name of the other one, but the first one was The Bear Went Over the Mountain, and where the Soviets talked about their time when they occupied Afghanistan and all the mistakes they made. And we went on to make those same mistakes. So, so there wasn't the intention to occupy it, to build up large bases.
Which is probably the way that which is the way that should have been done. But then I think the bureaucracy got a hold of everything.
Well, I think also we have this idea that we're going to change this country into some likeness that's closer to America. And I don't think that's possible.
That's not possible.
And if you read anything about Alexander the Great, there's a great book that just says Alexander the Great, talks about his time in Afghanistan, and if you take out dates and how the conflict was executed there, it's almost the same. So things haven't changed there for a long, long time. When we talk about bombing them back to the Stone Age,
they're already there.
They were there. So
not going very far.
Wasn't far. Yeah, but
that's Tuesday.
Yeah, yeah. So, that's a tough one. That's not something that anybody's going to change.
That type of change is more than just, I'm going to come to you. You're established. You've got kids. You've been living in the mountains. This is your way of life. I can't just come to you and go, "Hey, man, this is what we're going to do. Get on board."
Yeah,
you can't do that. It takes you getting on board, teaching your children, then those children teach you. It's a generational thing. You can't just change that way of living in that society in 10 years, 20 years we saw. But I mean, that's a 60, 70 year event.
It is, but it's also assuming that you want to change.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
There was a lot of people like, "No, I'm happy just the way things are." Right. They're not interested. So I don't think that change is going to happen. And not only that, but I mean, when we talked about the tribes, I mean, they are separated geographically. When we talk, it's like when you jump on a highway here and you want to go to Texas, there's a road that's clearly marked and it's easy. There's trucks. Everybody knows the route. If you want to go from Kabul to Herat, that's an event. not real well documented. There's no roads, so you're not talking like there's commerce that goes in between these places. It's each of these little areas they're separated, you know. So even if you had buy-in, it's super difficult, you know.
And all these tribes too are separated by different belief systems. It's not all one common.
Well, they have different ideas,
similarities in some, but
and some of them have been fighting each other
for
hundreds of years, you know. So why change it now?
Yeah. So you end up back in the States. How long did you spend in the States after you got back from Afghanistan?
We had about a year before we were ramping up for Iraq. So I went back to Bragg, went into an intel course. Great course. And then there was like, okay, we're starting to build up for Iraq. And, you know, that was much more, far less hasty. It was, hey, this is when we're leaving. This is the plane we're going to be on. This is where we're going to live. But also that was a lot of hurry up and wait, you know. So that was 2003, I guess. So I think we left right after Christmas of 2002, and then we were there 2003, and we kind of hung out for a while, you know, because we weren't really sure when it was all going to happen. But we were down at the Ali Al-Salem Air Base, which was pretty nice. The only downside is our tents were like right on the airfield, so it's all the aircraft were taking off throughout the day and night. You're living through that the whole time. But it was night and day different. You know, you had great gym, great chow halls. We had, although we did have when the Scud, the missile attacks, because you know when you'd hear alarm black, that meant that there was a bomb or a missile en route that exploded and believed there was like a chemical attack. We didn't take it too serious at first, and then over the speaker it said alarm black, and everybody kind of sat there like, what did that mean again? Oh shit, that's what that means. We got to go find our gas masks. So luckily, at least as far as I know, nothing ever happened with it. But yeah, so we waited there for probably 3 months before we went in. And then that was about the time that I think everybody went in. We just happened to go in on aircraft. We had some Toyota Tacomas, which seemed like a really great option at first, was what we were going to use. And then, do you guys remember the Fedayeen?
I definitely remember the name. I don't know much about them.
So they were, we'll call them, they were more of like an irregular force, but picture Toyota pickups with machine guns in the back and dudes that kind of colored outside of the lines. Come to find out, they also drove a lot of white Toyotas. So our Toyota Tacoma plan, we were like, well, maybe we should not use these. So we ended up having to kind of revamp our idea. We went back to Humvees, so it was clearly identifiable because we were in Tacomas, and we had tried to pull in. Remember, there was the Shamal. Remember that, where they had that huge sandstorm, and so we kind of tucked in with some tanks, and then as we were kind of moving in loosely in and amongst some of the the conventional forces, I remember an Apache came up on my right side. And he kind of looked at us. Then he comes around and he flies in front of us and faces us. And you can see the gun moving and so we're in a white pickup. And I got this huge American flag on my body armor. Yeah. I'm like, well, I sure hope he sees it, but I'm just not going to move. I'm not really sure. So that was kind of like, well, hey, you know what? It's time to switch out. We need to get with some Humvees pretty quick.
So Apache makes short work of that stuff.
Oh, God, yeah. Yeah. But, yeah, I mean... But you were right about that time frame, right?
We came in right after the initial forces came in and took down the palace and everything. We were in 2004.
Okay.
We were there when right when like real operations against the enemy forces, basically the terrorists.
Yeah.
We didn't go take down any of the palaces, but you were a part of that, right? Was that part of what you did?
We were part of it, but I mean, a lot of the. So do you remember the Special Republican Guard?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So we went into the airfield, and we initially went to the Special Republican Guard barracks, and it was very underwhelming because it seemed like it was something that had passed a long time ago, like it was for show. You know, when you picture like a personal hygiene kit, you got your toothbrush, your razor, and everything. Well, they were all wrapped in cellophane, and it was almost like they were set up for like they were an inspection ready unit, but not a real unit. So, and granted, I know a lot of the military forces they laid down their guns and they kind of walked away from it, but it didn't seem like this wasn't what you'd expect when you walk into a real unit. You know, you didn't have that same feel.
They were not professional.
So it was one of those where we had the expectation was there was going to be a significant fight to get into Bayap and into and there still was a pretty good fight to get into Baghdad, but we expected more out of the Republican Guard and everything else, which we didn't really see. So it was kind of one of those where you get there and you're ready to go and you're looking around, you're like, okay, nothing's happening. Now what? What's the next step? And by this point, you had I think the MEU. I don't remember which MEU, but they came in from the south up the east, and then you had Third ID that kind of came right south of Baghdad, and we went out to Bayap. But I know the Marines had a tough one getting in, and then so did Third ID. They were doing those thunder runs to try to get into town. So that was a pretty rough one, but we eventually transitioned out of the Humvees again, back into trucks, and we ended up finding our way into town, and found a great chicken shop, got some chicken, and then we found a house, and that's where we occupied that house for probably 8 months.
Wow.
Yeah. So it worked out really good for us.
So how long were you there that first time?
I think it was about grand total of 8-9 months. Yeah. It was pretty good.
So what was your mission there?
So it was all over the place. We started off with trying to make sure Bayap was secure, and then we kind of everybody refocused because they.
Bayap, real quick. Bayap is Baghdad International Airport.
Yep.
So that's the main hub of traffic of American planes coming in and out.
Yep.
That's where we needed to secure to make sure that we got our stuff there, our people there.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. And once that was fairly secure, we actually kind of sat around and thought, well, what's next for us? So one of the things that the team did really well is, being able to work in like non-military clothes, so a little bit longer hair. So that's how we ended up finding a house in town. And I talk about Bill Bennett quite a bit. He got killed in Iraq on that trip. I think a little bit later on, but we found a house that had an American flag on the outer gate. And we're like, what could this be? So we ended up, and there was this family who had been there. I think it was actually called the Polish Embassy for American Interests. No idea what that means. But it was great. We had underground parking, a gym, 3 floors of apartments, and that's where we did a lot of our. We initially were just kind of going around getting the lay of the land, like what's happening. We were talking to people and that's where I learned a lot about the Ba'ath Party. And that was where I was like, because we went into it, and I don't know if the information was the same for you, but if you were the Ba'ath Party, you were bad. But then we started talking to more and more of these people, and they're like, well, I'm in the Ba'ath Party, but I'm not really Ba'ath Party. And so you really started to kind of paint a picture of, what the real problem was here, and if you wanted to survive again, you had to be in the Ba'ath Party. I don't know, the guy that lived next door to us, I forget his name now, but he was probably one of our best educators because he had been in the Ba'ath Party for, I think, 30 some years. And he would come over at night and just kind of give us the lay of the land. We'd talk to him, ask him about, the party, about what's next, what he knows, because he was I think he had been a colonel at some point. But it's, how their rank and how they don't really retire like we do. So he was sort of in, but, he still had another, almost like a civilian function. But we had great conversations with him, sitting there every night, just learning all about Iraq, the people, the Ba'ath Party. It was very interesting because at that time I was writing a lot of reports about just what's going on in the area. Like, what's the vibe in town,
Yeah. I just remember there were times we'd go out and there were people cheering us, and there were times we go out and people hated us.
Yeah.
There was definitely a divide.
Yeah, and I mean, I know from 03 to 04, it was still like that. You know, there were some people that were like, thank God somebody's here to stop whatever's been happening. But I think some of those people that didn't like us might have also had maybe a little bit of foresight to know, like, is this really going to work out? And if I pick a side right now, am I going to end up on the wrong one when these guys leave? So there's a lot of that, I think, as well.
So was your mission, did you go after bad guys?
No, we were doing a lot more information collection.
Intel gathering?
Yeah, yeah. And to be perfectly honest, we weren't like, you'll hear the term like door kicking team, or that really wasn't us. Our bread and butter was we typically would go in early, and we were very, very traditional ODA. But we had I think the skills were like with Afghanistan, going in early, kind of being in before everybody else was in. That was very much our thing.
And I think might be interesting is just maybe give us an overview of what Green Berets and ODA, and specifically maybe your group versus maybe other ODA groups did. I think that'd be a good thing to know.
Well, I think as a Green Beret, one of the things is the term special forces is applied generally to a lot of units that are special operations forces. But special forces is unique because, and I'll kind of take this back a little bit, when you go back, the formation of special forces was where you had special forces, and then that's where the CIA branched off. And so the precursor to both of those, you're going back to the OSS, and so it was more about information. It was about building a catalog of people you might be able to work with, and then also understanding the area. So that was really what SF's main function was, and also to work with the host nation, to train them. And not necessarily at the time of war, but before something happens. So you're building partner force capacity. You're establishing those relationships, and you're also you know the area, and and we spent a lot of time on languages. It didn't always work out. I know I went for Russian, and then after 01, of course I never used it hardly ever. So it wasn't a big benefit, but we do spend a lot of time trying to, so we understand how to buy with and through. How do we work with people? Because I think it's probably a fantastic model, because you are getting people invested in their own future. They train, they can defend their own country, and you do it with a very, very small group. There was only 36 guys on the ground in the beginning of Afghanistan when most of it fell.
Now, is Green Beret a very general term, or all of Green Berets kind of have that same mission?
No. Green Berets, obviously it's specific. You have to go to selection. You go to the Q course, the qualification course. And everybody receives very similar training based on your MOS. You have a demo guy, which the sexy term is you're the demo guy. The other implied task is you're also the logistics guy. So there's, you've got a couple things, and a medic, and then you end up with your commo guy, and then you end up with your weapons guy. And then you've got a warrant and a team sergeant. And usually, though, the warrant and team sergeant had been one of the base MOSs to start with. Whether a commo guy or demo guy, weapons guy, or medic, or something along those lines. And then your captain. But so they all go through this base course, and it's. I know there had been talk previously to 01 that maybe the Q course needed to be updated, but everything we learned in the Q course applied directly in Afghanistan. It was 100% exactly what you would do. So the model still works. But once you get out of that, some guys do specialize. And we'll see even more specialization as the force changes, just because of technology and everything. But You have teams and battalions that are more focused on that direct action, CQB stuff. You'll have teams that are more focused on certain abilities to get into country, whether that be halo or dive or things like that. But there is a focus, but everybody arrives at the same point with that base level training.
So your team, you guys were more focused on intel and understanding what's going on the ground, but another ODA team could be more focused on direct action missions or different operations. For sure. You're still all Special Forces Green Beret, but you have different mission sets. And that's a little bit foreign to me. For the most part, as SEALs, we all kind of did the same thing. We had a couple different, we had demo guys, we had snipers, we had comm guys, but we all kind of had, at least in Iraq and even in Afghanistan, we all kind of did the same thing. We didn't really have an intel branch. We relied on Army intel, or there was probably some Navy people involved too, but Army owned the battle space, so we relied on others very heavily. We were just going in and kicking in doors and doing sniper operations. So it is interesting for me because I remember when I first got in, we were told about the ODA teams there, and that's what they did. They were linguists. They were kind of almost like CIA, what you would expect the CIA to do: go and kind of mingle with the locals, understand what's going on, deliver intel. And that was interesting to me, because you think, Green Berets, okay, they're door kickers, or they're crawling through the bush and sniping people, and that's not necessarily the case.
Yeah,
that's cool. It's really cool.
I think it's pretty cool, because you may not necessarily be able to pick and choose, but you might at least be able to affect what you want to do. So I think it's pretty interesting. I ended up, one of the other positions is the 18 Fox, the intel guy. It's super interesting. You're writing reports, you're interacting with other agencies, and you're kind of putting together what you think the battle space looks like, or what it could look like.
So you did 8 months in Iraq. And did you just do the one deployment to Iraq, or did you go multiple times?
So I came back, and then that was at one of those points where they're like, you either have to re-enlist or get out.
And you must have been at close to 10 years at that time?
Yeah.
10 years?
So I was like, well, I don't know. And then a friend of mine, he was like, well, I'm going to go do some contracting. I'm like, well, what's that look like? He goes, well, we're going to deploy overseas. I'm like, well, okay, that's nothing new. We got that. But the pay was different. And when he started talking, we were going to make $130,000, $140,000 a year. I'm like, well, that sounds interesting.
Especially in that time.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
That's big money.
Yeah. So me and Matt, we ended up going on to the Karzai detail. So we went over there and did his protective detail for about a year. And
that's crazy.
Yeah.
I remember that time. Yeah, Karzai.
Yeah.
That was the good old days.
That was a big detail.
Yeah.
That was 46 American former operators from
what year
various
was that?
units. That was 04 to 05.
Yeah, because we were doing the detail for Alawi in Iraq at the same time, and we were like,
we must have just missed each other, because I came from Iraq, and then I went over and did that one for a little bit.
Oh, did you?
Yeah.
Yeah, we were. So what happened with us is we were in Mosul. We were doing direct action operations. Alawi was the first American, what would you call it? Like, the Americans wanted this guy in, so he was the guy. I think it was like June of 2004. And no. Let me back up a second. They had a guy. I don't know how they appointed him elected. I don't even remember. But within 2 days, his detail allowed him to get assassinated within 2 days. So they had to pick Alawi somehow. I don't know how the details of why they picked the guy first, but I know the fact that the first American guy was assassinated within 2 days because he had his own detail. Alawi was the second guy, and they said, we cannot allow this to happen again, so we need American forces. And my senior staff guys had experience doing details, I think in Bosnia or Kosovo, something like that. And so like, okay, these guys are in Iraq already, they're close. And we had to be there in like 24 hours. It was madness to try to get from Mosul to Baghdad. And we were all of a sudden protecting, really at the time, the most wanted man on the planet. It was crazy. But yeah, I remember a lot of talk about Karzai at the time. And it was crazy that you're doing that detail. And we were over on Alawi. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a fun job. I mean, Kabul that time, it was interesting. Karzai seemed to be the guy that was going to carry the country forward.
Yeah.
Didn't really work out, but
And so you did that for a year as a contractor. Any cool stuff happen?
No, it was just interesting seeing all of the different. I think one of the most alarming things was when the IMF gave the Afghanis $9 billion, and the Minister of Finance says, "Well, I don't know where any of that went." And so
sounds normal, like what we do,
right? But
like
no, it was interesting, because we took him all over the place, all over that country. But it was interesting because you really got to see the country from a different perspective, and what he was trying to do. I mean, I do think he had good intentions, but it was just such a fractured time that there was no way he was going to be successful. He was really he was in control of Kabul. That was really it.
Yeah.
But yeah, they're just having a lot of different conversations, and then being part of so many different details that would come in, and then hearing what the international community kind of what they wanted for Afghanistan. It was interesting, kind of shape your opinion of what everybody thought they were going to be able to do versus what they really could do. But yeah, it was.
Well, it's a different man. It's such a different mission from going from being on the ground, snagging bad guys or doing intel, sleeping in the crappiest conditions, to now you're kind of right next to the leader of the country. You got a lot better conditions. However, you're completely on the defense.
100%.
And that was the biggest change, I think, that mentally for us. Like everywhere we went, now we were on the defense instead of being on the offense. And that was the biggest mindset.
Oh, yeah.
shift.
Yeah, I remember we were on he was on a meeting site, and it was just right outside of Kabul. And one of the guys that were up there on glass, this was during the Shura, when they beat themselves with the chains and the razors, right? So he's on an elevated position, and he calls down, and he, excuse me, he goes, hey, Pete. He goes, I don't even know what I'm looking at right now. And so we go up there, and we get a look, and I'm like, oh. And I didn't know what it was either. I'm like, I don't know what that is, but we bring up one of the interpreters, and he's like, don't worry about it. It's Shura. I'm like, what is going to happen next? He goes, oh, no, they're just going to keep beating themselves with razors and bleed all over.
What's the point of this ritual?
I don't know.
Yeah. Something weird that they did.
But yeah, it was they used to have the Loyal Jirga, and that was where they tried to get, it was the first time they tried to get all of these different tribes and leaders together as like one common governing body for Afghanistan. They had a couple of those, but didn't work out.
So then a year of protecting Karzai, then what?
Well, a year of that, and then I ended up going over to, I came up to Iraq for Alawi for a little bit.
What year was that?
Oh, that would have been late 05, I think.
Okay, we've been out of there for about a year.
Yeah. And then I ended up going to Africa. And then Africa, we were working in Nigeria. And we were training some of the Nigerian special forces guys. And that was super interesting because it's a totally different mindset and just totally different people. I mean, it was wildly different.
What are we doing in Nigeria?
I mean, it's kind of goes back to the J sets, where we are going in and we're trying to train their forces and
For what purpose?
Bring up their level of capability, because you had Boko Haram and some other outfits. There was, I think at some point, I don't know how prevalent it is now, but there was some talk of Al-Qaeda starting to move into that area, especially up in, it was called Kano. It was Kono. It was in northern Nigeria. That place was supposedly had an Al-Qaeda influence. So by training these guys up, and then, of course, they had to adhere to all the rules we would put in place. So they were good folks. I don't know what the impact was, but We would train them. And honestly, it was mostly basic soldiering skills. Just
Keep your finger off the trigger.
what's that?
Keep your finger off the trigger.
Yeah, get on the trigger.
Here's the safety switch.
Yeah, here's how to shoot. Some interesting conversations. There was it's kind of standard, at least in the Army. I don't know if you guys do it in the Navy, but on Fridays, when you release everybody, you always have like a safety brief. So you're like, hey guys,
Safety.
and when you're like, hey, when you guys go out, don't drink and drive, practice safe sex, all this stuff. And it was just sort of a habit. And so we gave them one of their briefs, and one of the guys was give him a quick safety brief, and I was like, hey, safe sex. And I was like, is there any questions? Which normally there's not. It's just not questions. That people are just like, yeah, whatever, I got it. I'm out of here. Raises his hand, and he's like, he wanted to talk more about safe sex. And I was like, you know what I'm talking about. Like, do I need to explain this? and I was like, well, you there's HIV 1 and 2 in this region. I was like, that's why. And he goes, no, that's not a problem for my people. And I'm like, oh, now I'm interested. What do you mean? He goes, we don't get it. So, he's, as a Nigerian fellow, he's like, no, we don't get it. Because that's an American problem. That's a white person problem. I was like, wow, that's interesting. I've never heard that before.
Yeah.
But believed it 100%.
So not true, but that was a belief
Yeah.
that they held,
Oh, 100%.
even if they probably saw people around them dying.
Oh, yeah.
That's crazy.
He believed it
I haven't heard of
100%.
Dr. Fauci yet.
Yeah.
Haven't heard of Dr. Fauci.
Maybe he used to work there, but but yeah, Africa was interesting. Did a couple trips there. Wasn't too bad.
So you guys, basically just the hope of training them up to be capable so that we didn't have to.
Yeah, so they would kind
could
of
fight for
police their
themselves
own
a little
country.
bit,
So was it part of the war on terror?
No, no. I would say so. There used to be, and I think it might still exist. It's called the African Contingency Operations Training and Assistance. And remember, this is also when Sudan was really hot. Was big. You said the war in Sudan, and this is sort of around the time they were building up the African Union. So these guys would all deploy into Sudan, and then with that came all the financial support and the training support to build these troops up so they could, one, go to Sudan and then also come back and police up their own country. So it was
How were the accommodations?
Well, luckily we had good air conditioning because it was super hot and super humid.
Aside from the AIDS.
Aside from that, yeah, it wasn't bad. So I used to eat with the fellas, so I would go down with the guys we were training, and they were always after me like, "Hey, come down and have lunch with us." I was like, "I don't."
Eat monkey brain today or what?
No. So they would have this. It was a little piece of some kind of meat, but they would take okra and boil it, so it had the consistency of snot. And went down there, and I was like, "Oh, can't. This is tough." And well, you talk about intense gastrointestinal issues. That was it. That was about.
They were-
Yes, you're going to now.
Oh yeah,
They were good. You just
Oh.
gringo, white boy.
it was a disaster.
Oh, go.
Just a disaster. But I think that coupled with they used to make these. It's like they were like little bread balls with meat on the inside. And when I was out walking around, I tried a couple of those, and I don't think it was cooked very well. So started layering all that on top, and it was a trip. I definitely came back. I was definitely at my fighting weight. I think.
Now, were you guys staying in some permanent structure, or are you guys staying in tents?
I don't know. We had it was like it was a hotel, motel more like, I guess. So it wasn't too bad.
Yeah.
Yeah. We had rented part of it for the training. So yeah, it wasn't bad.
And just you, a small group over there, or were you at just a small,
Yeah, it was probably a
small group?
small group, 10, 15 guys. Yeah. But yeah, interesting. That was my first trip to Africa. So it was definitely different,
Yeah.
And then I kind of came off the road for a little bit, trying to see if I still enjoyed that kind of work, and then realizing I came back and had regular jobs for a little bit, and it's like, that was actually a pretty good schedule. So I went back to that right away, and then I stuck with that up until about 3 years ago. Last one was a direct contractor for the government. So trips were a little different, mostly working out of embassies all over. So living accommodations were usually pretty good. But the, the work was more, I wouldn't say it wasn't kicking indoors, a little bit of information. But definitely it was good work, good schedule.
I'm always curious to know, like, people who are traveling around the world in that position. I mean, do you learn something new about the United States being on the outside?
I do. Or
Like
I learn somebody else's perspective of us, or I'll learn something I didn't know, because some people, like, they study it. Like, we live here.
Yeah.
We don't study it. I mean, we go through American history and stuff, but no, you always learn something. But you also, it's interesting, is you go to different places, you meet these different people, and I think for the majority, you come back with the idea that while they're all geographically in different places, got different religions, different color of skin, a lot of them are basically, we're all kind of the same. We kind of want the same thing. When you're talking to, maybe you've got a local security guard. He's doing this job, and he's got a second job because his kids are going to. He wants to make sure his kids have a little bit something better than he did. He's doing the same thing that any dad in America is doing. Now in a lot of the Middle Eastern countries, I didn't have those conversations with the wives, but I'm sure they're probably similar.
So, what do foreigners think of America? I know that's a broad question. And I know everybody's different, but just give us a perspective. I mean, you could even get in detail if you want about what countries think specifically about America.
I think it really depends. If we ever been in conflict with them, So if you took a country like like say Pakistan, they mostly like us. I think they, but I don't think they think about us as much as we'd like to believe they do. I think they look at a lot of our politics, and although it's not all that much different than theirs, that the sort of the carnival event that it looks like most of the time, but I think they are interested in us. They're interested in our lifestyle, but they also, they kind of look at us like we're just the new kids, like what they haven't been around. When you start talking, Iraq, we're talking about buildings that have been around longer than our country, so I haven't actually had that many bad experiences with foreigners who are just like, I just hate Americans. As a people, as a country, the existence of them, I just despise it. I have not really run across that many people.
I can imagine it could be a little bit of both sides. I mean, we're new to the scene, only a couple 100 years old, 250 years old. We don't have a lot of culture, but we have a place that people want to come to and prosper.
Very much so. I think the biggest thing that I've heard over the years is a lot of people just wish America would just stay out of their business.
Well, that's the other side of the coin that I was going to say. Yep. The two different things. One is like we have a great place. We prosper. Our people are wealthy compared to the rest of the world. But then we also just like to meddle in everybody's business.
Yeah.
It's like that. It's like that rich girl at school who just can't stop blabbing.
Yes.
The Lisa Turtle of the world.
Yeah, and that is one of the things I heard the most. It's like, why don't you guys just stop?
Just
leave us alone.
Yeah.
Well, I feel like, and I don't know because I've never been, but I feel like sometimes in the beginning stages of some of these conflicts, maybe not Iraq and Afghanistan, but others, like for instance, I'm sure the Ukrainians love us. Keep writing those checks, and you keep right. So in the beginning, they're gonna learn to hate us. But in the beginning, it's like, hey man, we need help.
Right.
So we come in, we give all the arms and the money, and they're like, oh, these guys are great. 5 years down the road, they're gonna, like you're talking about, when the bureaucrats start really getting involved, then they're gonna start going, can you guys leave? Like it's not me, it's you.
Right. Yeah.
The relationship's not going.
Well, I mean, what do you think will happen there with Ukraine?
Well, we're damn near close to World War III. I mean, Russia just said that they're posturing with nukes.
Well, they're doing literally exactly what they've said they would do.
Yes, exactly
from
what
day
they
one.
said.
Like if you guys get involved and give them those type of missiles,
Sure.
party on.
I mean, what would we do?
We'd already be we'd already be taking way more action than they have.
Right.
Because this is, if you think about it, it's been a long ongoing process.
Yeah. So I try to look at it from both sides, and I think, well, God, if I was Russia, I would not be happy about the relationship that especially the way the relationship was going between Ukraine and NATO. But at the same time, why do they get to invade another sovereign country? You know.
Well, 2 or 3 days before Russia invaded Ukraine in February, was it 24th?
Yeah, I think that was it.
We announced, and it was Kamala Harris, as vice president, announced that we were pulling Ukraine into NATO. That was the red line. It's been the red line since Clinton.
Mm-hmm.
So I think they didn't have a choice. I mean, really, if you think about it, if presidents long before Putin were saying this is our red line,
Right.
Ukraine will not be in NATO, or else we will have a problem.
Mm-hmm.
Well, then we stated it. I think there's no turning back from that.
Mm-hmm.
I get the sense.
And so was there more to that red line than just NATO? Or is it just because by saying, hey, you're in NATO and these are all the things that come with that, that's why this is the red line? Because, we're not only they're in NATO, that means they get the support of all the other NATO countries, but then we're talking armament? And I think that was probably the driver.
Probably the driver.
Right.
I mean, imagine if Russia put nukes on the border of Mexico.
Oh, sure.
Okay, that's not going to happen. I mean, I can tell you right now, not just the president, but the people would not stand for it. I mean, we're in Arizona, we're a border state. Heck no.
Right.
Get those things out of here. And you can imagine if you put yourself in their shoes, like, I don't want nukes on my border from an organization that was first established in the Cold War to protect Europe from Russia. Well, Cold War is over. Why do you exist?
That's a fair point.
And Putin's even said that we would be happy. I mean, this was in early days in Putin's tenure. I think somewhere in the early 2000s, he's like, "Hey, we'd like to join NATO," and they refused. So anyway, I think there's been plenty of opportunity. From what I understand, there's been plenty of opportunity to have good relations with Russia, but it's been probably a decade at least.
If you think about it too, if you look at literally every movie that came out in the 80s, we're always fighting. The bad guy's always a Russian.
Oh, yeah.
Always a Russian.
Yeah.
Right? So it's like we're conditioned as Americans to just go, look, the Russians are on the wrong side of this, no matter what. And I'm not saying they're on the wrong side or the right side because I don't know. But we in America just go, got to support Ukraine. It's the Russians, man. We got to get Balboa out here. We got to get Sylvester Stallone involved. It's like,
I mean, one of the first movies I saw like that was Red Dawn. Yeah. It's always going to be that way. But I don't know. I mean, does that mean then that when Trump takes office and he's like, all right, if you leave Ukraine, no NATO for Ukraine, you guys get out, restart. Is that what that looks like?
I don't know.
I bet it's going to look a lot different than it has the last year and a half, 2 years, though.
Sure.
I mean, you've already got organizations going, yeah, we're done fighting. Like days after the election, like we're done fighting. We don't want to fight anymore. It's like, why?
Well, and my real issue, like Ukraine, yeah, should we support them? Probably, because they were invaded. But there were some other precursor decisions, but the level of monetary support, not material support, because the material support is, I think, where we're basically clearing out old gear anyway. But the monetary support, like that's a lot of money that went out. Oh, yeah. And when you start looking at all the things that we need in the U.S., like, well, not sure that I support that still. I don't think I'm okay with that now.
Yeah. Yeah, like you said, clearing out the old gear. What is that? That actually helps. That stimulates. It's the whole military industrial complex. It stimulates our economy. Like,
right.
They go, well, we got to build more missiles now because we just gave these guys all the old stuff. So
yeah.
One of the things you hear though is that we're going to wear the Russian military down. This is totally contradicts what you and I have probably seen. I know my experience, the longer we fought the Taliban, Al-Qaeda, the better they got.
Oh, yeah.
And every army gets refined in battle. They get better. So why would you? I mean, yeah, you're going to deplete some of Russia's assets, but they're going to be way better at what they've done. And they just fought, a war for 3, 4, 5. Who knows how long this is going to go? But they're going to get better. They're not going to get worse.
Yeah.
So this is a really weird.
Well, it's you made a good point though. So go back to Iraq. Okay, so remember they were using cell phones to set up IEDs, and that's how we were targeting them. So pretty soon they were like, oh, wait a minute. I know we're getting bombed because of that cell phone. let me get rid of that cell phone, or at least put some distance between me and the cell phone. So yeah, why wouldn't Russia get smarter? Why do we think that they're just?
And we got better too.
But why would Russia just give up?
Oh, they wouldn't. They're going to win. It's a war of attrition. They're not going to lose against Ukraine.
I've heard this said. I don't know who said it, but the Russians know how to be miserable. You know what I mean?
That's a true statement.
So
that's a true statement.
They think they can probably pretty much outlast any of us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's in their DNA. It's in Ukraine's DNA too. But Ukraine just doesn't have enough people.
No.
I think Russia's got 100 million more people.
Well, and that's a good point too when you think about, okay, so the people, right? So we're talking about a generation of men who aren't going to be there. They're not having more kids. They're not raising their kids.
Sad.
Wow. Now what? Now what do we have here?
Ukraine. I mean, I've read some history over the last 100 years about Ukraine, Russia. I love that type of history, but Ukraine has just taken it in the. They were part of what's called the Holodomor, which was probably the biggest mass.
Yes, I read about
starvation in history. I mean, I think there's only estimates of how many people die. You don't know how for sure, and there's estimates range between 3 to 10 million. Probably somewhere in the range of 5 million people died in I think a 2-year time span in Ukraine only. I mean, and people starved all over the place in that region, but that was the worst of them all. They are no stranger to just death and destruction and misery in that region. And it's like, why are you guys just still fighting and just admit it's. I don't know. It's crazy to me to think that the last 100 years, how much destruction has gone on along that border.
Well, we've certainly gotten very good at it. Very good at it.
I mean, you can't say that we haven't provoked it. I feel like, if nothing else, it's really our war. It's not really. I feel like Ukraine is just doing what we tell them. We're the ones supplying the money, probably the one pulling the strings, it seems like. I mean, this is a good example. What was it? 4 or 5 days ago, Biden allows Zelensky to use intercontinental bliss. Okay, the craziest thing about that statement is Biden approves.
Right.
Why does Biden have to approve? Like, this is your country. That signals to me we are clearly in charge of this war from the Ukrainian side. Like, Zelensky doesn't do anything until we tell him to.
Well, what's awesome too is in the middle of a war, he's just traveling to the United States. I'm just coming here. Hey guys, what's up, man? Like some more money? Can you guys write me a check? And then I'm gonna go back. Like he's in zero danger.
Yeah.
Somehow, like he's like trying to be like a guy on the front lines and wearing his green. Like you're in zero danger right now.
There's so much I think that goes on behind the scenes that the regular everyday run of the mill American person just has no idea, and it's a bummer. I just wish that we knew more. We pay so much in taxes, and this is like we're kind of stakeholders in this country. We should know.
Do you think it's with Ukraine? Do you think it's resources? Because apparently, like their grain and they're like absolutely like resource rich. It's like this one region that just has. I mean, and you know how the U.S. likes to do it. We like things that are resource rich. We like to start fights over things that are resource rich.
But I don't know. Are they resource rich, and does that affect us? Because when we talk about resources, Russia supplies, or at least did supply, most of Europe with gas.
Right.
Gas. I think it's Gazprom. So if it's a war about resources, then that's an important consideration.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of corruption in Ukraine, and I think some of our top politicians are getting kickbacks on it. I think that's a huge reason. I mean, Biden family is in the middle of that, and we knew about Burisma before Ukraine was even in a war. So I think a lot of politicians are doing things to suit themselves. There's probably, just like everything, when you do something, there's 2 or 3, 4 or 5 things that are going to benefit you. But one of them, it's probably a main driver, is personal security and financial gain. I don't know. It's hard for me to imagine. We have our own resources right under our feet. We are the most oil-rich nation. I think I heard this the other day, more than Saudi Arabia, if we just drilled. We don't need their resources.
Right.
You know, we could drill our own for our own oil.
Oh, for sure.
So what is it? Is it like, is NATO so important to us that we really just have to get them in? Like, is Ukraine so important to NATO that we need it? Like, I just wonder if this military-industrial complex is really the driver of so much wealth in politics. And
Ukraine wasn't even in NATO, and look, the whole world's coming to defend them. So, like, what's the point of the membership of NATO?
True.
The whole
That's
world's
true.
already like, oh, you can't do this.
Wasn't it FDR who was the one who cautioned against the military complex?
That was Eisenhower.
Was it Eisenhower?
Eisenhower in his last speech, yeah. But and then JFK probably got killed for that having those same ideas. Yeah, it's a crazy world we live in.
What's that?
Crazy world we live in.
Oh, and I think it's just going to get more crazy. You know.
Do you find yourself, now that you're 25 years as a warrior, some capacity, now we're out and we look at war differently, I think. Do you find yourself looking at Americans going back to war in a different way?
I do think I used to work with a guy, Adrian. He was one of our medics. I think we probably should send older men to war because we're up early. We're already pretty grouchy.
Yeah.
And we've
Most of life's in
raised our
review.
kids.
Yeah.
Yeah. But no, I do look at it differently because I think, because it does leave a mark. You know, even some of the most well-adjusted people I know, there's a mark. It leaves something. You don't come out of warfare, combat scenarios, or any of that. Nobody gets out for free. You know, you carry something back with you. So I think as diplomats, as military leaders, really thinking through, like, what is the purpose of this? What is the real value here? What do we need to have? Because one of the things America has going is we have 2 oceans on either side of us. So if we decide to engage in a war, I think we really have to ask ourselves the question, how does this benefit us? And are we willing to send, the neighbor kid down the street who just turned 18? Are we sending him to war? Are we sending, and it's men, women? Are we changing the trajectory of their life forever? I mean, there's a lot of kids who went to Iraq, and Iraq was where I saw it the most. Like, you have kids who they were in country for 2 days, and next thing you know, there's a EFP that goes through the vehicle and legs are gone.
Yep.
So I do look at it a lot differently, and Iraq is a great example where I look at it and I think, well, did we really think this through? Was this what we thought it would be? Did it have the real the positive impact that we thought it would have for sending one kid? Doesn't matter how many kids, doesn't matter lost their life or not, but is it worth sending one?
Well, I think it's really changed my perspective, not having kids, but now having kids that are going to be close to being on their own. And when you look at wars in Ukraine, and then now there's Israel, and I have a 17-year-old son, and a 15-year-old son, and a daughter who's 18, going to be 19. Like, I don't want them going to war.
No.
I don't want them going with that changed my first being in combat, and then having children who could be victims of political greed. What do you think about that?
Oh,
Because you have children that are that age too.
I've got a 17-year-old who she's about the age, and she's very interested in the military, and yeah, she could definitely end up overseas in some war, whether or not I support it or not.
Yeah.
She could end up there. I wish there was a way we had more visibility on what we're going to go do, why we're going to go do it. You know, why are we going to go to this country? Why do we think it's worth sending, you know, American kids over there, American forces? And I, you know, if you would have asked me, I don't know, 10 years ago, when we were in the height of, you know, two front wars, I'm like, yeah, we should, you know, America's the strongest. We should help shape the world. Now I'm a little more reserved. Like, you know what? Maybe we don't have to shape the rest of the world. Maybe we can kind of let them figure it out on their own.
Tell me how you came to that conclusion in just 10 years.
Well, because look at the areas that we have intervened. Are they better for it?
Clearly not.
And
Yeah.
there's a
Yeah,
lot
you
of,
name one. Like, can you even name one?
you know, I mean, Afghanistan didn't change. I haven't been to Iraq in a long time, but I got to think it hasn't. I mean, I'm sure if you were on the other end of the bath party of Saddam Hussein's, you know, you maybe would say, well, maybe it is a little bit better. But as a whole, it didn't get any better when I saw it there. You know, maybe the Balkans. The Balkans were probably a better success story, but no, there's a lot of places I think they would have just eventually solved it.
But are any, you know, there's very few wars you can look back in history and say, yeah, that was worth losing all these children.
Yeah.
I mean, it's hard to think about. When you think about losing people, sometimes you just think about them as numbers. It's really hard. But when you think about them as your own children, that's a totally different perspective. And you go, no, you know, I don't know if there's really much. Yeah, I do think like we need a strong military for sure. I think strength through peace is peace through strength. I'm sorry, is the way to go. But I feel like we're just intervening in everything. And
Agreed.
it's just stirring the pot everywhere.
Yeah.
And someone's going to have to deal with it. Of course, we're the superpower, so we're going to have to deal with it.
But yeah, no, I think if we would just let a lot of things just evolve on their own. Just we don't have to do it.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of bad places out there, but we can't help everyone.
Well, and a lot of times we don't even know what the problem is. We come in and say we've got a solution, and then when you say what is the problem, well, we don't really know. And the solution we have we don't know anything about the culture. You know, we don't know what kind of if this fix is it a lasting fix? Is it really a solution? We typically just don't know, you know. But we come in there with a little bit of arrogance and say we're going to fix this.
A lot of arrogance, I think.
A lot of arrogance,
I
but
think
you
that
know,
was very generous.
We're
of
just
you.
gonna, we're gonna install a pro-Western government and everything will be fine.
Yeah. Everybody wants what we have, right?
clearly. But I mean,
Well, then you
Maybe not.
leave countries like Iraq and Afghanistan, like you said. I'm not really sure about Iraq, but Afghanistan, close to one of our bigger enemies, Iran. Now they're kind of just, as that country's in shambles, Taliban running it again, pro-American government toppled. Now you get Iran that comes in and they go, hey, sorry guys, come on over here. You know, we'll help you out. We'll take care of you. We'll take you under our wing, and cool. Now that's a country we know hates us.
true.
And now these other countries have that influence.
Well, regionally too, they're right by Russia and China. It's a great strategic place for all of our enemies, not just Iran.
True. True. You guys ever heard of the book, The 100-Year Marathon? So it's about China. It's very, very interesting.
I have heard of that. I didn't know it was a book, but I have heard that saying.
Yep. It's I guess from Michael Pillsbury, I think is the guy who wrote it, but he knows what he's talking about. He was part of that, I don't want to call it the China desk, but he has been involved in decision making, how America approaches China for decades. And the name in itself is how China views it's a 100-year plan.
Yes, that's right.
You know, and that kind of patience. It's something that we have a hard time
Well, we've
with.
got like, what, 2 or 3 days worth of patience, maybe? Like
We
news
don't even have
cycles.
that. When I order something on Amazon, I want them to
now.
place it in my hand 3 minutes later.
Oh, yeah.
We don't even have that.
If it says it's going to be a week, I'm like,
Yeah.
what's wrong with this situation? No, I'm
Maybe I'll
with you.
just drive to Walmart.
I guess I could go buy it.
Yeah, my kids won't even drive. Dad, I want McDonald's. Okay, we're just going to DoorDash it. I could throw a football and hit McDonald's. Like, nah, I don't want to get up and go. Right, okay, yeah. Let's pay somebody $15 just to deliver our food. God,
How do we compete against a country that's thinking 100 years in the future, and we're thinking about the next 24 hours?
I don't know, because on one hand, you would say, well, with an election cycles where you're in 2 and 4 year election cycles, it's impossible. And then you might say, well, yeah, but you have politicians or you have people in the government who were there for decades. But then you don't know, are they operating under a one approach? Are they all on the same sheet of music? Probably not. So, and without being a dictatorship, I guess, then how do you get people in line with that? I don't know how you compete with that, you know? I don't see how that's possible.
Well, correct me if I'm stating the obvious here, but like they're teaching their kids trigonometry in 3rd grade. We're teaching them that you can use whatever bathroom you want. If you feel like you're a cat, that's okay. You can be a cat. Like maybe we start there. And
That's a good place to start. Yeah.
Kind of see if that develops a little.
Yeah. But, you know, I mean, you take the cat scenario. You know, the kid who says, I identify as a cat. Great. You identify as a cat. Okay. But then you have, you know, that one kid. There's 99 other kids that are going to school, doing normal stuff, playing sports. They're good kids. So, but we have this, and I think the news cycle is part of it, where we hear about the one kid. Because nobody ever talks about the other 99 kids that are just solid kids. Good parents, good kids, whatever. They're just doing great. Yeah, it's not a good story.
Right.
But there's so many people. And this is something that's not just this isn't just American specific. This is worldwide. There's so many people that are they're doing the right thing. They get up in the morning, they go to work, they take care of their family. You know, they're building amazing things. That's not the story.
That's why I love you, Pete. It's so positive. It's got a positive outlook on
everything. you know, I mean, it comes back to this. It's you got two guys digging a ditch. One's whistling, one's not. You're still digging a ditch. You might as well enjoy it.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, that's good perspective. It is, because you're right. There's most of people are just out there working hard, going home. They're not on their phone all day. They don't care about social media. They just go to their job. They come home. They take care of their family, and they're just doing their life.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's true. We all get caught up in what's on the news because that's all we know from a large perspective. We can't see the guy in middle of Ohio who's just taking care of his family and going to work.
Right. And maybe we don't want to hear that, but that's mostly what probably the fabric of the world is really about. You know, that's the real people. That's the real story.
Yeah.
You know, but you're not going to hear that on Fox or CNN or anyone else.
Drive ratings.
Could you imagine what the news would look like if that's it? Like you got 18 minutes of like, oh, this guy's doing this. This kid just, donated this money for a special, and then just one oh, and there's a car accident. It killed 4 people. Okay, good night, guys. If that was all you saw.
Well, imagine. Just let's take you, Ryan. What if the news came out and said, hey, you know what? Here's some exciting news. Local business owner Ryan says, you know what? I'm gonna change how I do business a little bit, and I've got a bunch more time to spend with my family.
I'd be like, click. I can't even watch myself. It's boring as hell.
Who's this loser?
Right. Yeah. You know, there's no drama. You know, doesn't have a girlfriend in each port.
No one got shot.
Right.
Come on.
Yeah.
So people would be like, oh, whatever. That's not interesting. But what's funny though is you go out into the mainstream news, they won't report on that. But there seems like there's more and more of those stories where people are actually they're tuning in, they're subscribing to things like the good news stories, you know. And I think that's what I'm interested in. You know, Ukraine, yep, I got it. It's probably going to work itself out like most things.
And I love that too, because you spent 25 years around war, like hell in a lot of ways. A lot of people would think that. Blood, guts, gore, people hating each other, fighting each other. And you have this perspective of peace, I guess. I would call it peace. When you come home, I want to live my life in peace. And I do feel that to have true peace, you have to have gone through war. I mean, that's kind of a figurative statement, but there's some truth, there's truth to that. You have to know the other side to be truly happy with the other. And I do think that's why I do think that there's some value in people who have been in the military because there's perspective about war. There's perspective about what it really means. And I think that's why we see so many warriors who are against us being involved in Ukraine and against us being involved with Russia. Like, don't provoke Russia. We don't need this, you know? Against, like, I don't know who's right or wrong in Israel and Palestine. It's a very complex issue. But, like, don't start World War III over it. Like, maybe we just let them figure it out, and we kind of just chill and just watch and be like, yeah, I know Israel, you're our friends and allies, but if you got to handle your business, handle your business. I get it. So I do think that there's some uniqueness of former military guys who have that perspective. I think it's cool, and it's cool to hear you say that too, because the more people I talk to in depth about this, the more former military guys, the more I hear that the same sentiment. Like, yeah, I've seen hell, and I don't want to see it anymore. I want peace.
Well, and I would think, as we walk around with supercomputers in our pockets, and yesterday the SpaceX launched another rocket. Can we figure out how not to send more kids to combat? Can we figure out how to make this work? I would hope. I would think so. I mean, are we growing as a global population to be able to consider how do we make this work?
It's like the biggest question of our time.
Yep.
Like, we're these super advanced species, yet we're still blowing each other up.
Yeah. It's pretty bizarre.
It's bizarre.
But you make a good point though when you talk about what former military guys and they want more peace. But I think it excludes a lot of the population because they're like, well, I wasn't in the military.
Right.
But I think one of the things that we have gotten a long ways from is just doing hard things, because you can't like the comfort of a warm house until you've been somewhere cold.
Until you've been cold, right?
Right. And you can't say, well, God, have you ever got in your car and been like, man, I sure do enjoy this. I get in my car, I press a button, it starts, I drive where I want. And if I want it to, it'll tell me exactly how to get there, until you've had to walk somewhere and you're like, damn, that's 40 miles from here? Well, shit. I don't. So, I mean, but I think it builds an appreciation that you got to do hard things.
Yes.
And that I think builds an appreciation for all of these niceties that we have that we don't take into account.
Such a good point. Such a good point. Well, I think we've come to the end here.
Okay. How do we know when it's the end?
Well, I've got only so much data storage. So I see the
computer in your pocket said, nope.
So I know we're getting close. So, dude, really appreciate you being here.
I appreciate it. This is my first podcast. I've never done one.
I'm glad you did it with us, man. I really am. And I hope we didn't go too far, and we went just to the right amount. And I hope everybody got an idea of what it's like to be you for the last 25 years ish. I know there's some things you can talk about, some things you can't, but one of the things I just wanted to do is I want people, tax-paying Americans who have who are shareholders in this country, to know what's really going on with their money. Like, we don't want to put people in danger. We don't want to put our soldiers and operators in danger, but I think we have a right to know some things. And so I appreciate you sharing that with us, because those stories, they don't come out very often. So I appreciate it, Pete.
Very true.
Thanks for being here, buddy.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Appreciate you.
Okay.